When I was in my late 40s, I did a stand-up comedy routine at this quaint little coffee house in Altadena called the Coffee Gallery. They had like this open mic, and I did okay. I didn't do horrible, but I just did okay. And in the front row, when I got off stage, there was this older gentleman with a salt and pepper beard and short afro and this big bright smile. And he looked at me and said, "Hey, you are a funny man. You are a funny man. You're a funny man." He said his name was Leslie Perry and that he was a storyteller. I'm like, wow, storytelling? That sounds cool. Well, what kind of stories do you tell? He said fables, children's stories, fairy tales, the kind of stories you might find in a library book. And you should come to my story shows. I'm like, I hesitated because I really didn't think I wanted to hear any children's stories. And if I'm being honest, I just thought they might be boring. But something told me to go, and I did. Well, Leslie Perry is about 5'6" and about 50 pounds lighter than me. But when he took the stage, he appeared 10 feet tall. His voice boomed into the audience. His smile brightened up every inch of the theater. He was animated. I was mesmerized and captivated and pulled into the world of the animals and the characters in the story. When he got off stage, I was like, wow, Leslie, look, man, that was fantastic. He says, thanks. You should be a storyteller. I'm like, no, I'm a comedian. You're a storyteller. He said, no, you could do it. I'm like, well, I don't know, man. I went home that night and I wrote down ideas for stories. And, some of them were funny, some were sad, and some were quite embarrassing, which you'll never see the light of day. But I eventually came up with this emotionally charged story about a not so perfect relationship between me and my eldest daughter. And it went on to talk more about how I struggled and journeyed to be a better father for her. Leslie helped me with that one. He helped me edit it and try to get it ready for stage. And when I felt I was comfortable, I took it to the open mic. Well, I thought I was ready, but I wasn't. I stammered, I hesitated, I choked up a lot, and it got so bad that I just couldn't wait to get off stage. And if I'm being honest, there were quite a few people in the audience who couldn't wait for me to get off stage, too. But who was in the front row? Leslie Perry, with that big smile. You're a funny man. You really are a funny man. And you are a storyteller. When you get that story worked out, it's going to touch people's hearts. Well, he kind of became my storytelling mentor. Shortly after that, Leslie was diagnosed with ALS, and his health quickly deteriorated, and that big bright energy of his gradually dimmed until he and his big smile were no more. I continued to struggle with storytelling, mainly because I wasn't comfortable being as honest and vulnerable, for I was more comfortable being a comedian because then, all I had to do was be funny. uh, so I was considering going back to stand-up comedy. When one day I was standing in the light bulb aisle of a Home Depot where I worked, when this woman I had never met before walked down my aisle, stopped, and stood next to me. And while we were talking about light bulbs, she paused and looked at me and said, I need to tell you something, but I need your permission. I'm like, uh-oh. No, it's not anything bad. I just need to, but I need your permission. Go ahead. She says, you have this energy about you that's very welcoming and warm and bright. It's very contagious. I'm like, oh, okay. And whatever you're working on, continue to do it. I mean, if you have any doubt, don't, because it's going to be fantastic. And then she turned and walked away. Well, that evening, I worked on that story between me and my oldest daughter. I was at this outdoor theater, amphitheater, and Altadena. It's outdoors. And I like going there because you can work on your material out loud in a kind of a stage environment. And most of the time during the weekday, there's no one there. So I'm on stage, I'm working on the story when this man in his late 80s walks into the space with a cane and he sits down right in the front row without saying a word, just sits down. So now I have an audience of one, which is cool with me. I don't mind. I mean, I'm cool with that. And I work through the story. When I finish, he raises his hand and says, "Is that a true story?" "Yeah, it is." "Is that your story?" "Yes, it is." He took his hand and put it over his heart. He sighed heavily and said, "Thank you." And he got up and walked away. About 5 minutes later, a man in his late 50s jogs into the theater space, stops right in front of the stage, and jogs in place. "Hey man, what are you doing?" "I'm working on this story I wrote about me and my daughter." He goes, "Oh, that's a great story. Wow, I love stories. You know, you have like this big bright energy about you, and it's really interesting. It's like this warm, welcoming kind of energy. I don't even know why I'm saying this to you." "Well, if it makes you feel any better, you're the second person today to say that to me." And say, "Oh, I get it. You needed confirmation." I'm like, "What?" "You needed confirmation." And then he jogged right off. I finish up my story and I pack up my notes and I head over to the coffee gallery. I grab myself a chai latte and I sit down to look over my notes when my friend Tom walks in. Tom is a harmless conspiracy theorist and a believer in the positive energy of the universe. He sits down next to me and I tell him about my afternoon. I tell him about the lady at Home Depot. I tell him about what happened up at the outdoor park. At which time he sips his Earl Grey and leans in and says, "Hey man, somebody's trying to get you a message." I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. He says, "No man, somebody's trying to get you a message. The universe is trying to get you a message. Who do you know who believes in you and wants you to be a successful storyteller?" Of course. "You're a funny man. You are a funny man. And you are a good storyteller."